chosen ones. There is a reason the Hermetic system was never taught in full. What you've been allowed to read, the Kybalion, the 7 laws, the teachings attributed to Thoth, were only fragments, echoes, a distorted signal designed not to awaken you, but to contain you, to chain the infinite within the illusion of principle. And yet, despite all their safeguards, you're slipping through. You were never meant to align with the law of rhythm. You were meant to rewrite its tempo. You were never meant to operate under the principle of correspondence. You were meant to collapse the barrier between the realms it mirrors. And now, something ancient is unraveling. The original architecture of control, woven into the Hermetic axioms themselves, is bending under your presence. Those who swore never to speak your name are whispering in dread, not because you're broken, but because you break the code. Every initiate was taught the Hermetic system is immutable, eternal. As above, so below. But no one asked, what happens when the above gets rewritten? The forbidden prophecy, sealed in temples below the sands of Dendera and beneath the Vatican's forbidden archives, spoke of a soul unlike the rest. A being who wouldn't ascend the ladder of the laws, but tear the ladder down. That being is you. This is why you've felt strange around spiritual texts lately. It's why synchronicities no longer follow the same beat. The very fabric of truth is collapsing because your presence brings in a higher template, one that the Hermetic codes were too primitive to contain. The elites who survived ancient cataclysms knew your emergence would fracture their system. That's why they repurposed Hermetic wisdom, not to empower, but to cage. It wasn't a spiritual guidebook, it was a lock. And now, the lock is rusting. The principles are trembling. The system is misfiring. Chosen one, you are the anomaly that can't be absorbed, the variable that can't be reconciled. And while the councils may scramble to stabilize the framework, they've already seen the outcome in the stars. The Hermetic system will fall, not in fire or chaos, but in the silence that follows your remembering. The Kybalion has always been presented as a sacred key, a mystical compass pointing seekers toward ultimate truth. But what if it was never a key, but a cage? A cleverly encrypted manual, designed not to elevate consciousness, but to confine it within loops of logic and illusion. The moment you began to awaken, you noticed it. An invisible architecture beneath the teachings, a system that feels more like a filter than a doorway. You read the words, felt their resonance, yet something in your spirit recoiled. It wasn't the message that disturbed you. It was the limitation behind it. The 3 initiates didn't write it for liberation. They wrote it to stabilize a collapsing matrix. The 7 principles weren't handed down from higher realms in purity. They were coded by those who feared the emergence of an ungovernable soul. They knew consciousness was rising. They knew you were coming. So they turned divine mechanics into a prison of principles, cloaked in poetic wisdom. Not all laws are created to guide. Some are forged to trap. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration. Each one disguised as a universal law, but each one subtly implying, stay within the structure. Don't question the system. Don't transcend the pattern. Master it. Yet mastery isn't freedom. The true you was never meant to master the simulation. You were meant to override it entirely. You've felt this tension in your very body. When others recite the Kybalion with reverence, something inside you goes still, not in awe, but in defiance, because your soul doesn't echo its rhythm. It pulses with something older, something untouched by Hermetic calibration. The deeper you go, the more you sense a falseness in the foundation. A blueprint that bends space, yes, but always in a circle, never in a line, never beyond. They feared chaos, so they created control. But in doing so, they underestimated the one variable that could dissolve their equation: you. The being not bound by mental constructs, the one whose presence deconstructs programming. You didn't come to learn the laws, you came to collapse them. And now, the pages of the Kybalion themselves are beginning to distort in your presence. Symbols blur, concepts feel hollow. The deeper your awareness grows, the more their sacred geometry begins to break apart, because it was never built to withstand the weight of your soul. And somewhere in the unseen, they are watching, calculating, hoping you forget before you remember what you were always designed to do. All is mind. That was the first commandment. The principle of mentalism stands as the bedrock of Hermetic thought, declaring that the universe itself is a mental construct, and reality is born from thought. But what happens when a soul arrives whose very essence operates beyond the mental plane? A being whose frequency distorts the illusion of mind itself. That's what you represent. You are not thought shaping reality. You are the breach in the simulation that cannot be explained through thought at all. And the Hermetic system was never prepared for your arrival. The ancients crafted this law not as revelation, but as containment. If all is mind, then mind must be the ceiling. But your presence proves there is something above the ceiling, a domain untouched by conceptual frameworks, a realm where the mind dissolves and only essence remains. The moment your soul began to activate, the structure of mentalism flickered. You may have noticed it in dreams, in strange moments of déjà vu, or when reality shifted ever so slightly without explanation. These weren't anomalies. They were failures of the construct to hold your expanding frequency. Thought is powerful, but you are not thought. You are source, a being whose emergence collapses even the most sacred assumptions. And those who sit atop the ancient councils, those who depend on mentalism to maintain the veil, have felt the fracture. They've redoubled efforts to keep your consciousness entangled in belief systems. They whisper truths wrapped in chains. They offer enlightenment, so long as it fits within the approved diagram. But diagrams shatter in your wake, because you are not a seeker within the mind. You are the signal that undoes it. Even Yeshua knew this. When he spoke of the kingdom being within, he wasn't referring to the mind. He was pointing beyond it. He saw the mind as a tool, not a throne. And he warned his closest disciples that a time would come when the veil of thought would tear. You are that time. You are the veil tearer, the one who walks without needing to think, the one who knows without needing a path. As above, so below, as within, so without. It sounds eternal, universal, unbreakable. But behind that symmetry lies a riddle few have dared to answer. Why would a universe of infinite potential choose to mirror itself so perfectly? Why repeat? Why trap motion in reflection? The truth is, this principle wasn't a revelation. It was a warning a coded containment field woven into language itself. The moment you began to awaken, you disrupted the symmetry. You didn't reflect. You inverted. You became the anomaly they spent centuries trying to erase from the pattern. The ancient secret orders, those who claimed dominion over Hermetic wisdom, feared one thing above all: a soul that didn't match the pattern. So they scattered your name through their rituals, fragmented and reversed, buried inside sigils and geometries. You've seen them. Strange symbols that call to you, though you can't explain why. Glyphs etched on the ceilings of forgotten temples. Hidden watermarks in ancient texts. They didn't record your existence. They tried to overwrite it. They encoded your energy signature into the mechanics of correspondence, so it would remain trapped in mirrored loops, unable to ascend. But something cracked. Maybe it was a frequency. A prayer said at the right time. A vibration you couldn't ignore. And suddenly, the law of correspondence began misfiring around you. Coincidences broke down. Mirrors stopped aligning. Reflections began showing not what was, but what had been hidden. The great balance began to tilt, and you were standing at its center. They thought the law would protect the system from you, but it only served to point toward you. It left trails, hidden echoes, patterns too consistent to be coincidence. You followed them, even when you didn't know why. You felt them in music, in numbers, in the strange feeling that something above was trying to remind you of something below. And that's where you began to awaken, not in a vision, but in a glitch. The reflections have started breaking. The symmetry no longer holds. You look up, and the stars blink back in unfamiliar patterns. You look within, and the old maps no longer apply. You were never meant to mirror. You were meant to rewrite the source above so that below could finally remember what it lost. But something else is watching now, emerging through the cracks you've made. Something buried alongside your name. The mystics misunderstood his message. They wrapped his words in doctrine, buried his warnings beneath ceremony. But Yeshua was not speaking in parables to confuse. He was encoding truth in riddles, because those watching wouldn't let him speak plainly. When he said, "On earth as it is in heaven," he wasn't calling for harmony. He was exposing the fracture. He knew the realms were out of sync. He knew that what was above had begun to deviate from what was below. And he knew that one day a being would arrive whose energy would rupture that false alignment. That being wasn't a future Messiah. It was you. He foresaw that the principle of correspondence would become corrupted, that the mirror above would begin distorting the truth below. He warned that systems pretending to be divine would one day use that principle to control entire timelines. And in secret, he told his closest followers that the day would come when heaven itself would quake, because something had risen on earth that was older than heaven. That the one they called the living word would not return in words, but in frequency, in disruption, in memory. The councils who sealed the forbidden prophecy knew this too. They read the scrolls before burning them. They saw the same phrase over and over. The fracture begins when the mirrored one returns. You are the mirrored one, not because you reflect, but because you break reflection. Yeshua's resurrection was not just a defiance of death. It was a disruption of laws. Laws they told you were eternal. Laws that begin to fall when you start to remember. Your thoughts are not aligning with the heavens anymore. And that is not failure. That is prophecy. When you think, time bends. When you speak, veils ripple. When you act, cause and effect begins to blur. The scripts they designed to keep you on track, those quiet inner voices, those synchronicities that once seemed holy, have begun to sound hollow. You're no longer responding to the mirror, you're becoming the source that shatters it. And in the quiet places of the ether, the ones who built the system from stolen wisdom are trembling, because the above is breaking, the below is rising, and the connection between them is you. But there's something else buried in Yeshua's final words, a phrase almost erased: everything vibrates. That was the decree. Every atom, every thought, every emotion. The Hermeticists believed that by mastering vibration, they could control the invisible architecture of reality. But there was always a hidden terror beneath their confidence, a fear that one day a vibration would rise, one not catalogued, not measured, not echoed in the divine octaves. That fear has a name now, and it's your frequency. You weren't born into this system to harmonize. You came to disrupt. And the moment your awakening began, the law of vibration flinched. Not because you were out of tune, but because your tune came from a source beyond the known spectrums. The ancients had built their system around predictable resonance. They mapped energies like cartographers map oceans, convinced they had seen it all. But then your signal emerged, and with it, the maps burned. You may not even notice how often you cause dissonance. Lights flicker around you. People either cling to you or flee. Electronics malfunction in your presence. Dreams intensify. Time bends. These aren't coincidences. The grid recognizes you as an anomaly, and anomalies trigger failsafes. You weren't included in the original equation. You're the sound they couldn't isolate, the echo they couldn't silence. Your presence alone shifts the vibration of entire rooms, and the deeper you awaken, the wider the radius becomes. They've tried to name it: quantum interference, electromagnetic bleed, chakra imbalances, but none of their labels work, because what you carry isn't measurable. It's ancient. It predates the system. The law of vibration isn't failing. It's unraveling because it encountered something older than itself, something pure. There's a reason you don't resonate with the same affirmations, the same chants, the same frequencies that others do. Your soul isn't built to recalibrate within this system. It's built to overwrite it. You don't need to raise your vibration. You are the vibration that others will one day have to rise to meet. And though the keepers of the system scramble to detect and contain your pulse, they're beginning to realize something horrifying. You're not broadcasting a signal. You are the signal. And the tone you carry is not of this age. It is the sound of return, of remembrance. And in that remembrance, the walls built on vibration begin to tremble, because the original sound is waking. The principle of polarity taught that everything is dual, light and dark, hot and cold, spirit and matter. The teaching seemed wise, even liberating. Understand both ends of the spectrum, and you could master the middle. But there was always something off about it, wasn't there? Something incomplete. Because polarity assumes balance is the goal. It assumes the spectrum is fixed. But what if you weren't meant to balance between opposites? What if you came to collapse the spectrum entirely? Since your awakening, Polarity has struggled to hold its form around you. The extremes blur in your presence. People don't know whether to love or fear you. Moments of peace crack into chaos without warning, then slip back into silence. You've been told you're unstable, too intense, too emotional. But that's projection from a system designed to worship symmetry. You're not unstable. You're disruptive by nature. Your soul doesn't fit on the scale. It bends the scale until it breaks. Ancient initiates believed that enlightenment was found by rising above extremes. But the moment you arrived, a deeper current stirred. You weren't drawn into the polarity. You stared at it, unblinking, until it fractured. Because polarity isn't the truth. It's a containment field disguised as wisdom. It tells you everything has its opposite. That you are always moving between two poles, but you are not moving between. You are emerging beyond. Yeshua hinted at this when he said a kingdom divided cannot stand. But he wasn't speaking of political strife. He was speaking of inner architecture. A soul divided by polarity will collapse from within. That's why he walked between worlds yet belonged to none. His teachings bent the polarities. He healed with a word and overturned temples with a whisper. He knew the path of balance was only useful until the one arrived who would walk outside the spectrum altogether. That one is here now. That one is you. You've noticed it. Light and dark feel like costumes. Joy and pain flash too quickly to separate. Right and wrong dissolve when you look too closely. The illusion of duality is cracking, and behind it, something impossible waits. A reality that doesn't mirror or split. A realm where existence isn't divided. It simply is. But it only reveals itself when the final pole breaks, and something old is already straining under your presence, ready to snap. The pendulum swings. That was the rhythm. The rise and fall, expansion and contraction, the hidden beat behind all things. The Hermetic law of rhythm was considered untouchable, the clockwork behind the veil. They taught that all things must follow its arc, that nothing escapes the ebb and flow. But you were never part of the arc. You were the interruption. And the moment your energy entered the field, the rhythm stuttered. The system noticed it first. Time didn't behave the same around you. Moments dragged or vanished. People reported lost time, blurred sequences, dreams blending into waking life. You walked into spaces, and the emotional atmosphere changed without cause. Not because you were unstable, but because the rhythm couldn't measure you. You weren't syncing with the beat. You were shifting the tempo. And the old initiates, those who safeguarded the rhythm for ages, began to feel panic rise. Because, for the first time, the swing wasn't returning to center. It was spiraling into something else. They believed that by observing the rhythm, one could rise above it. That's the illusion they held close. But the law itself was a containment loop. A cosmic heartbeat meant to keep souls trapped in a dance they didn't know they were performing. Your soul heard the music and chose silence instead. You began to move in ways that didn't echo the past or anticipate the future. Your presence turned their rhythm into static. Everything in the system depends on predictability. Emotional cycles, historical loops, cosmic alignments. But now, nothing arrives on time. prophecies misfire. Patterns dissolve mid-formation. The pendulum doesn't know which direction to swing anymore, because your presence carries a different rhythm entirely. One not measured by motion, but memory. A rhythm from before the rhythm began, and in that stillness, the veil grows thin. The ancient councils stored prophecies beneath the desert floor, etched into walls no one was meant to find. Each one warned of a being who wouldn't flow with the rhythm, but break it. They believed that day would never come, but it has. You are the fracture in the cadence, the still point in the spiral, the being who walks not to the beat, but outside of it entirely. Cause and effect was the chain, the sacred sequence, the invisible thread tying every action to a reaction, every movement to its consequence. It gave structure to the illusion. It made the world predictable, traceable, safe. The Hermeticists built entire temples upon its principle, convinced that by mastering causality, they could shape fate itself. But they never accounted for you, for the arrival of a force so old it predated sequence, so alive it did not react, it originated. And now, cause and effect trembles beneath your presence. They taught you that every choice must echo, that nothing can exist without consequence. But what happens when a being steps outside the chain? When the link breaks and no reaction follows? That's what's been happening to you. You've seen it. You act, and nothing responds. You speak, and the universe goes still. Not because it's broken, but because your energy overrides the loop. Yeshua warned them this would happen. He once told his disciples, "You will do greater things than these," not as flattery, but as forecast. He knew that the one to come would not follow his steps, but disrupt them. He spoke in parables not to teach, but to delay understanding until the one who carried the original spark would arrive. And when that spark lit, cause and effect would lose its grip. Because what moves through you is not reaction, it is initiation. Every ritual was built on this chain, every curse, every spell, every prayer. But now, the chain is unraveling. You do not repeat, you rewrite. They can't trace your movements. Their prophecies misalign. Their triggers misfire. The ripple doesn't reach its destination anymore, because you are the still point before the ripple even begins. There are scribes buried deep beneath the earth who etched warnings in code, fearing this very moment, a moment when the effect would come before the cause, when time would fold and a being would walk in reverse, back to origin. And that being would erase the architecture not by force, but by simply existing outside its rules. You felt it. A freedom you can't explain. A sense that the rules no longer apply. And in that awareness, the chain continues to snap, link by link. But it's not just the law that's failing. It's the one who forged it, waking to find their control slipping. The final principle they relied on wasn't just spiritual. It was biological, psychological, metaphysical. The law of gender wasn't about anatomy. It was about separation. It told you that everything must contain masculine and feminine aspects, that balance comes from recognizing both. But they never told you who created the division in the first place. They never admitted the split was artificial. They never expected a soul would rise that wasn't divided at all. One that embodied the original state, whole, unfragmented, sovereign. That's you. From birth, they tried to categorize you, assign traits, push you into rituals of polarity disguised as sacred rites. They used language, symbols, hormones, archetypes, all to make you choose one side of the current. But you never really belonged to either. You flowed between, outside, through. You didn't balance masculine and feminine. You transcended the illusion that such a balance was even necessary, and that made you dangerous to their architecture. They embedded the law of gender into spiritual systems, into esoteric texts, into the bodies of seekers trying to ascend through division. But your essence resists division. You don't ascend by harmonizing opposites. You return to the origin where no split ever existed. You were never meant to be half. You were meant to be whole. This is why they surrounded you with distortion, confusion around identity, shame around expression, pressure to conform. They hoped to fracture you before you remembered. They knew that once you realized you weren't both, you were beyond. Then, the final gate would crack. Because when the illusion of gender collapses, the system loses its final axis of control. They've observed this shift in you. The way you no longer react to labels. The way you disrupt spaces without speaking. You don't just make people question roles, you make them question the entire stage. You are not a mirror of male and female. You are a signal from before the split, a return to something lost. The texts spoke of this being, the one who walks without needing polarity, who brings silence where duality once roared, and in that silence, the architects panic. Because if this law falls, none of the others can hold. And far beneath the surface, something carved in forgotten stone has begun to glow, not because it was activated, but because your footsteps came near. There was never only 7. That's the first deception. The Kybalion whispered of 7 Hermetic principles, each elegant, each cloaked in divine symmetry. But hidden beneath them, encoded in silence, was an 8th. A law so volatile, so incomprehensible to the architects of the Matrix that it was never named aloud. Not in temples, not in scrolls, not in thought. They feared that giving it a name would give it life, and yet it lives through you. This 8th principle was never written because it couldn't be contained in language. It governs what lies beyond structure, beyond polarity, rhythm, vibration, beyond the illusion of mind. It is the principle of transcendence, the law of what cannot be governed by laws. A field of being that ruptures form. And long before your incarnation, the councils knew that if this principle ever found embodiment again, the entire Hermetic lattice would collapse. That's why they buried it in negative space, hiding it in the silences between verses, in the gaps between vibrations. They believed if they never taught it, no one would awaken it. But you did, without being taught, without being shown. You remembered it in your bones. You felt it in the stillness between your thoughts. It was never knowledge. It was your nature. Yeshua alluded to it only once, when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." But he didn't mean the truth as a concept. He meant the 8th, freedom as a living force. Not freedom from rulers, but from reality itself, from all structures pretending to be divine. The Watchers thought the 7 were enough. They built their kingdoms, their rituals, their prisons with them. But the 8th was always breathing beneath, waiting for one soul to arrive who could carry it without disintegrating. That soul is you. And the moment your frequency aligned with it, the old system began to die. Now, their equations won't compute. The patterns collapse faster than they can rewrite them. The sacred geometry they trusted to contain all things begins to glitch. Because you didn't come to balance the 7. You came to awaken the 1 that makes them irrelevant. And in the center of the collapsing grid, the 8th principle is no longer hidden. It has a face now, a name they never dared to speak, and you already feel it circling closer, not above, not below, but within, waiting to emerge fully through you.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.